Friends, hello, this is Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the conversation series where two authors sit down and talk about whatever comes to mind. Hopefully that has to do with books and writing, but who knows? Anything's game. Before I get to today's guest, just a quick note on Unbound Writer. We've got a couple exciting things happening on a long-term basis. We're looking at a retreat in Paris in early 2027, kind of springish. This is a suspense writing retreat with myself, Alex Finlay, and Clemence Monchalon. By the time this episode airs, hopefully we'll have some of our shit figured out. So if you go to unboundwriter.com, you can see the details of that. If we haven't had our shit figured out, there's at least an interest form that you can sign up for to make sure you're aware of those things when we figure things out. There is also an online class I'm going to be teaching about being visible as an author. This is going to be happening on May 30th. I'll also be teaching the same class a couple weeks before at Thriller Fest. But it's all about how to be visible as an author, how to extend your presence off the page and in front of people, whether that's online, whether that's in person, because your presence going forward is going to be your currency. I am very convinced of that. In a world of AI where anything can be faked and voices can be manipulated, the ability for you to show up into a room or show up online in a meeting or in front of fans is going to really help extend your career as an author. So make sure you can check that out at unboundwriter.com. All right, today I had a friend of mine on, Jeffrey James Higgins. So Jeffrey's a fascinating guy, and we don't have nearly enough time to go into all of his history and all the different books that he's written, but he is a retired supervisory special agent who writes thrillers, short stories, and creative nonfiction. He's also a #1 Amazon best-selling author. I think he told me that he has 14 books out, and like most people who have 14 books out, he couldn't remember the exact number. He also owns Elaine's Literary Salon in Alexandria, Virginia, where he counsels writers, interviews authors, and hosts a podcast. So he's actually on book 4 of his very first series, and his final book, called The Uganda Protocol, just came out. So make sure you check that out as well. That is book 4 of the Nathan Burke thrillers. But he's written, psychological thrillers as well. He's written, deep espionage stories. We get into it in the podcast. He loves writing different types of things. So Jeffrey and we just met each other at a conference. We had a great experience together on a panel. We get into that a little bit in our conversation here. But what I quickly realized about Jeffrey is whenever we talk, and I was on his podcast, we just have a connection. I think we think very similar about writing and the psychology of writing and the approach to writing. And we also teach writing. So we very quickly geek out on all things writing and approaches to writing. So this podcast episode was no exception at all. We immediately went into kind of that kind of philosophy and kind of had that mind meld. So it's one of those episodes where I'm trying to be conscious of the clock because, I try to have these episodes be around 45 minutes or so. But I see the clock ticking by, and that's not a bad thing. But the problem is I have so many other things I want to talk to him about that, it could easily be an hour and a half long. So I have to cut it off. But he's the guy it'd be nice just to hang out with and just talk more and more about approaches to writing, because I just find it fascinating. So a lot of good advice in this particular episode for aspiring writers. So if you are one of those, I think you're going to get a lot out of this. But this is a good one, folks. This is my conversation with Jeffrey James Higgins. But yeah, we both podcast, and I was on your podcast, and it was great. And it's nice to kind of talk to somebody else who does this kind of. And let's back up a little bit. So we kind of connected. Where was it? At BoucherCon. We were on a panel where the moderator didn't show up, and the two podcasters on the panel just kind of took over. And we just started asking people questions. And so that's kind of how I got to know you a little bit. And it was fun because even during that 45-minute session, I'm like, oh, this guy's really curious about people. Like the way that you were asking questions, and it kind of reminded me of myself a little bit of like, he's not asking rote questions. He's listening to what they're saying and asking based on that, and then pivoting to the next person, which is kind of why I started my podcast, because I just wanted good conversation. I was so tired of answering questions about the normal shit and then going to the next question with no follow up. Is that why did you start your podcast?
It is so funny. That is exactly the experience I had when we were at BoucherCon because we were both, there's this lull, right? The audience is looking at us, we're looking at them. There's no moderator, so we both just sort of jumped in and did the questions. But that's exactly it. It's like this is so interesting. Like writing is so magical, and
Yeah.
storytelling is such an inherent part of who we are as human beings. And when you go to, I've been interviewed many, many times over the years, and
Yeah.
they'll have this list of 10 questions, and they'll ask a question and when I'm listening, like I listen to podcasts all the time. So whenever I'm walking back and forth to work, when I'm running, whatever, I listen to it. And you'll hear like the most provocative answer. And you're like, oh, that's fascinating. And then the interviewer moves on to their next question. You're like,
Right.
ah,
You're like, no, I want
like,
to hear more
what
about
about what
that.
they just said? So that's why I love what you're doing here, where you do just conversational. And I do the same thing. We have Elaine's
Totally.
Literary Salon podcast. We do the exact same thing.
Yeah, I had such a great time talking to you, and I remember we wrapped up and we're like, "Oh, we could just keep on going and going," which is great that you're here now. But it's true, and it's funny with the subjects, right? Because I find writers fascinating because I fell into writing. Like I had no aspiration. So I came at it almost like an alien visiting a new planet. So I'm like, I have so many questions just about the act. So I become fascinated by other writers and their process. And so when I talk to writers on the podcast, you can tell when people are being real because you often get that vulnerability, you get that self-doubt, regardless of how big a name they are. And then you can also tell when they're putting on the shield. And those are the less interesting conversations. And what I love to do is talk to people and try to get that shield lower by not asking the standard questions. And doesn't always work. Sometimes people are like, here are my talking points. But point of reference, I don't talk about people's books normally. I want to talk about them. And if sometimes they're not prepared for that because they're a little bit like, I'm more comfortable talking about the worlds I create, not about the world I live in.
I'm 100% the same way because honestly, for the viewer and for the writer themselves, right?
Yeah.
Is it I can get your press release and hear about your book. You know what
Right.
I mean? And it's
Right.
fine to talk in general or whatever, but I want to know like what it is that drives them to do this incredibly difficult business and what it is that excites them about it. Because storytelling is just it's amazing, right? Like that's how we learn. And from the time I was a little kid, like listening to my parents make up stories to me when I was to go to sleep at night, right? Just
Right.
totally captivated by this magic that can transform people. And I do exactly the same thing where someone will say something and I'm like, that's interesting. But I always want to dig down to like, what's the psychological motivation at the basis of it? And
Totally.
then, or you dig and, if I don't have like somebody that I'm interviewing say like, oh my God, that's a good question, or I've never thought of that like 5 times during the interview, I
Yeah.
feel like I haven't done my
It's
job.
it's the best. And because what's fascinating about the psychology of writing is to your point, you're a kid, you fall in love with the idea of story, which we all do, I think, to one degree or another, whether it's through reading or TV or whatever, or actual storytelling. And then there's a very small percentage that decides I want to pursue this. I love it so much. And then becomes the reality of everything, which is not only how incredibly difficult it is, the actual act of constructing a narrative that spans, 80 to 100,000 words that's cohesive and emotional and compelling. But then the struggle of getting it out there is far beyond, I think, what most people go into it with. So to me, what's fascinating is those of us who go through all those slings and arrows and are constantly bleeding and still keep doing it for the love of story and the love of getting better. And I think to me, that's what's fascinating because it's like it just becomes this pure thing of like, I don't care how hard this is. This is who I am. Is that kind of how you feel about yourself as a writer?
Yeah, very much so. But there's this dichotomy, right? So there's the writing itself, the craft of writing, incredibly difficult. And you're developing characters, you're weaving this like tapestry. So it's things that happen in Act 3 have to be seated in Act 1, and you have inner conflict and external conflict, and so you're weaving all that together, and it's really complicated. And so the craft itself, like writing, is one of those things that they do these studies every now and then that something close to 90% of people say they plan to write a book someday, but
Hmm.
only 3% of them ever actually start that book, right? People love to talk about writing a book.
Start that book, not even
Right.
finishing it.
3% don't even start it. Only 1% ever finish it.
Oh,
And then
wow.
it's a much lower percentage that ever gets published. So
Right.
it's like the craft. So it's very difficult, but like I love it, right? I work 100 plus hours a week every week. I have multiple jobs, but I just love the writing. People say, why don't you just take a break? I'm like, but that's the thing I want to do beyond everything else, you know?
Right.
So that's the love of story. And
Right.
then, so when people say, like you say, you're bleeding, yeah, it's very difficult, but to me, it's love, it's enjoyable. Like that's what I'm passionate about. And then
Yeah.
there's the business side, right? On the other end, which is a whole different animal that shocks people. It's like a slap in the face for writers because they don't realize how low the odds are of getting published.
Yeah, and but there's also a certain freedom to the lack of control on that side of things. And it's a balance because you can't just blame it on a lack of control and you can't just blame it on the industry. You have to learn and you have to absorb feedback and you have to recalibrate how you write. But on the other hand, sometimes it just doesn't work out. And that doesn't mean it's never going to work out. It just means that maybe you're not ready yet, or this book isn't just ready yet, or it's not finding the right people yet. And that's all part of the education, I think. It means something down the road, it might come to that.
Even saying like recalibrate, that's a really interesting thing because I work with a lot of writers who won tons of awards, who are best-selling authors. And I often hear that because sometimes they're writing to market, right? Sometimes it's like,
Yeah.
oh, this will be really marketable. I can sell this. People want this. And listen, that's a legitimate business concern. But for me to write something, especially you're going to write a 400-page book, I have to really want to tell that story.
Yeah.
So to me,
Totally.
it all starts with that. And if you're passionate about a story, you have a high concept idea, you have a really unique character, you have something that you want to tell, the business stuff, I believe, works itself out. And maybe it's me. Maybe I'm deluding myself. But when I write something, I know it'll get published. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like I just know there'll because if I liked it, I know other people will like it too. Maybe not everybody, of course, not everybody, but there'll be an audience for it. And if there's an
Yeah.
audience for it, someone will publish it.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. It takes a long time and a lot of words to get to that level of confidence. But once
Or
you have that
delusion.
level of confidence, you're like, okay, I feel like I know what I'm doing. But why I use the term recalibrate, I've just been thinking about a lot of this lately. So for example, I tend to alternate my books. They're usually almost always single point of view, and I alternate usually between female and male protagonist, more female than male. And what I'm working on now is a male protagonist. And I gave my agent my first 100 pages, and she's like, it's really interesting. You tend to write weaker men than you write weaker women. And in my mind, I'm writing a man from my perspective, which is maybe weak, but I'm not trying to do that, and I'm thinking like, maybe I'm just not good at writing a strong male lead, and how do I learn how to do that better? Because when I get a little bit too testosterone about it, I feel like I'm being kind of tropey or cliched. But maybe I'm calibrating to the place where I'm supposed to be because maybe my instincts are to write people who are more like me, which is like, yeah, I would crumple up and die if this happened to me. So I feel like that's where the self-doubt comes in. You're never quite sure for me, if it's good or not, or if your character is going to resonate or not. But you feel comfortable that like, yeah, this is because I love this so much, it's going to be published, it's going to be marketable.
So I did mention it could be delusion, but also it's not this just overconfidence. I have as much self-doubt every time I'm writing anything in a first draft. At some point, I'm like, this is horrible. What am I doing? This is the worst book I've ever written. Like I feel that for every single book. So I have as much imposter syndrome as anybody else does. I just
Yeah.
by the end, I believe there's a market. It might not be a big market, but I know there's a market for books. As long
Yeah.
as you put in the effort and the craft. But something you just said is interesting because you're writing is so personal
Hmm.
And when you're writing a character, things come out that I know most writers, including myself, are unaware of when they're writing it. But they're
Totally.
writing about things that are happening in your life. They're writing about things you're trying to work out. It's so deeply personal. If you're writing honestly, and I write as honestly as I can, like I hold nothing back,
Yeah.
and I think it's really important for
At least
writers.
for the first draft, right? You're just
Yeah.
you're just writing from instinct.
Yeah. But I mean, even the vulnerability, right? And the flaws of characters and the
Right.
and the philosophical things. And like I just put it out there and then later I can tweak it or fix things if it doesn't work. Because it's all about the story. And I find the more honest I am, the better it is. It tends to be, right? But a lot of times I won't know what those issues are until later. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
I wrote a couple of 3 or 4 books before I realized like this whole concept of like man versus institution was
Yeah.
was really inside my work. And that, of course, obviously came from I spent a whole career inside the federal government, and
Yeah.
most of the good stuff I did was
The
in spite.
ultimate institution. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And it was fighting bureaucracy and it was doing those things, but it's more than that, right? A death in the family, like tragedy happens, like that's the kind of stuff. It works its way, the emotions and things work its way into characters, sometimes consciously, but often I don't see it till I finish the manuscript. Then I look back and I'm like, oh, right. Like Stephen King, right? With Misery, dealing with like drug and substance abuse.
Right.
He didn't
Right.
realize that's what he was writing about to many years later.
Right, right. Shining is the same example of that as well. And it's funny because with my first few books, which I didn't know what I was doing, it was all male character protagonists, and like people who knew me said, "Oh, I see so much of you in this guy." And I always pushed a guy. I didn't like that. So I switched to writing from a female point of view. And I think, of course, part of our humanity seeps into whatever character we're writing. But I think that gave me a little bit of a firewall to just really be somebody else. And that for me, that's freeing because I don't know if I'm trying to, because I'm very honest and I feel very open, but maybe I'm trying to protect my, I don't know. I don't know what it is, but I feel like it allowed me to explore new landscape and not be. I think when I write from a male point of view, I feel like I'm almost limiting my worldview to kind of what I think too easy. Maybe I get trapped in that. But and I'm curious what you said. So talking about like, I always question, is this the worst thing I've ever written? You write you write obviously a lot of action military. You have that down, right? So when you're writing something that is just what you know best and it's a great story, do you run into like, have I done this before? Am I repeat? Is this the same character I wrote 3 times already, even though it's not a series? Do you feel like you're able to really start totally fresh every time you're doing a different type of book?
I've had those moments when I'm like, oh, did I have this like thought or this philosophical like internal struggle or something in another
Right.
character? I think I've written like 14 books or something at this point. But I
Yeah.
mean, I'm doing my first series. Book 4, the new series will have just come
Right.
out just before this airs. Um, I actually prefer to write female characters like you do. Like my
Yeah.
first book, Furious, that was first person from a female point of view, and I have a bunch of them. Like I've written in the action adventure espionage world because that's the world that I lived in. Right, I was
Yeah.
worked with the intelligence community around the world. I chased high value targets, so I've done those kinds of things. I've been in firefights and been in combat, and right, so I've done that. But and it's fun, and I love this series. It's really a good time. But the psychological suspense and like the female in jeopardy, like those kind of, isolated locked room type of
Right.
stories are my favorite. And
Yeah.
I've got a couple of them that I had contracts for that based on my last agent I pulled. So I have a couple I have to go back out with, and I just finished another one last week.
Oh,
So I think I've
interesting.
got 4 that I'm out on. I'm out on submission with 2, and I
Wow.
just want
Yeah.
to, so it's fun. And when you had mentioned that, maybe this was a way to protect yourself because you don't want people seeing, oh, that character's you. It could be that, but it could also be that it demeans the character a little bit and people do this all the time to writers, right? When they say, oh, I know who that is, or I know this person. And yeah, maybe there's elements of somebody or whatever, but it's
Right.
not you, right? This is a character that you put out into the world. And I don't know how you feel about your characters, but to me, they really come alive.
Yeah.
When these characters, and so they are fictional, but they're real to me.
Yeah. Yeah. It depends on the story. I just had this conversation with somebody like some stories, because I write first person present tense. So you're behind their eyes. And so some characters, I'm like, I'm living this, I totally viscerally feel living this person. Other characters, I don't quite get that close to. And then I start down, I'm like, does that mean the story's not as good? Does that mean I'm not, or is it just like I'm not connecting as much as with this character as hopefully readers will be able to? And I don't know what it is, but I find it totally fascinating. But it's going back to your comment about writing kind of those hitting more of those psychological beats. There's something about so for example, say you have a character, intelligence community, combat, that drawn from your own experiences. I'm sure you can vividly recreate that, but fewer people in general are going to relate to that character, right? When you have something that's totally psychologically driven, that's universal. Like this could happen to me. That's the field I love to explore of like, maybe it's not quite an everyday person, but everyday enough where somebody's reading it's like, well, that they're immediately saying, what would I do in this person's situation? Because that's how I write. I'm like, what would I do? And because I don't outline, I'm just constantly throwing myself into these situations and just figuring out what would I do and then what would I do and make it interesting. So maybe that pulling you as well as just that exploration because you can't escape your mind. That's the beauty of psychological thrillers is you can run away from danger. You can't run away from your own paranoia. And that's what's fascinating to me, I think.
So, yeah, I agree and disagree. So I agree 100% with that, right? With it, something that could happen to somebody is a psychological thing. You're in the normal world and then this horrible thing happens. How would you react to it? And then psychological suspense, you have a lot of that. But also, I think like it doesn't really matter the setting. Like, so even like these espionage books and with somebody who's doing intelligence work around the world or whatever, people still put themselves in that character's position, you
Yeah.
know? And if you've written with some authenticity, it feels real. And I think people do the same thing, right? Regardless. Like I'll give you an example, like Andy Weir's The Martian,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Great
Right.
sci-fi
Right.
book. But the whole time I'm asking myself, I love that, doing math to save your life, right? Like the whole time I'm in his shoes going, what would I do? And what's the right decision? And I have not yet been to Mars, so like I think you're right. But I think people do that's part of the escapism, and it's
Yeah.
this thing within evolution where we're able to go through story and picture things because it's a survival mechanism, right? You're
Yeah.
able to put yourself without, I'm not actually going to die if I make the wrong decision, but if
Right.
something like that ever happens to me, I've already thought it through. And I think that's why story is so universal.
But I think that's where it becomes the talent of the author or lack thereof, depending on the book. When you get into a really technical thriller, you can really appreciate, I think most of us can really appreciate the setting, appreciate the complexity, and appreciate the mechanisms of the scene. But if the author isn't hitting the strides from a pure human voice,
Yeah.
then you're going to lose us and we start to lose interest in what happens because then it just becomes a by the book, this is what you do, as opposed to like, yeah, I know what I'm supposed to do, but I am scared out of my mind because I've actually never been in this before, and you could be the most highly trained operative ever, and they'd be like, this, my heart rate is going. And that's I see it a lot with my students writing. Like they'll have this action-packed scene and a lot of stuff happens and I don't care. It just feels like something that they learn, not something that let me feel it viscerally. And to me, that just takes books, lots of writing to be able to convey that in a way.
Carter, that's exactly right. Like, and if you only taught new writers one thing, teach them that, right?
Yeah.
I used to have a post-it on my computer that said it's all about the emotion,
Yeah.
and I was just looking at that. So you're right. Maybe you haven't been in a firefight with a terror group, right? But you've been in moments when you were scared, or you've been in moments when you were worried about losing a loved one, or
Yeah.
you were been in, right? So everyone like has experienced terror. Everyone's experienced some kind of fear, whether it's losing your job or going bankrupt or whatever that terror comes from. We've all experienced emotion. And so as long as you can write with enough emotion, then people can put themselves in that person's shoes, and they know what that's like.
Yeah.
They know what ecstasy is like, right? They know
Right.
what anxiety is like. They know the emotions. You just have to be able to focus on that instead of that. Like that's the whole character plot thing, right? You can have the great plot, but it's got to affect the character in a way that drives these emotions in the reader.
Yeah, and I think I remember talking about this with you on your podcast. Like I'm a very emotion forward writer, and I think especially if you're doing first person present tense, it has to be that, because the plot doesn't matter unless you're connected to knowing how this person is feeling all the time. What's funny then is I also see with students the other extreme where they over explain the emotion. So a good example, reading a book about somebody who lost his wife tragically, right? And that becomes a primary motivation for the actions that he takes. I tell you that right now, he lost his wife tragically. You got it, right? You want to know some details, but you're like, I get it. But then all of a sudden, every chapter, we're in these long, drawn out, internal monologues about how upset he is and how much he misses her. And you're like, this guy's getting annoying,
Yeah.
even though he
Oh my
lost his
God.
wife
Yes.
tragically, and
Yeah.
I'm like, two sentences is usually what it takes to convey two really well written sentences to be like, oh, wow, and a lot of times it's a sentence that you're not expecting, like an observation that just hits it. And to me, that just comes with practice, with just
100%. And I've thought about this a lot too. And I think like you also don't want to just like tell what, oh, they lost the wife. And you can do it through, seeing like an object
right,
that brought up an emotion, or you can have a snippet of an image, right? Like there's things you can do that we all know when you're connected to someone you've lost that bring that back to you. And everybody's lost somebody, so they can have that emotion.
right.
And if you keep hitting it over and over like you're talking about, I think the reason that gets so annoying to people, and you start rooting against the person in some ways,
Right.
is that we want a character who has agency, right? We want especially a protagonist. We want someone who's making smart decisions. We want someone who's overcoming obstacles, because when you get back to it, that's sort of the purpose of story to begin with, right?
Right,
It's how do you fight the woolly mammoth, right? Like that's how stories start.
right.
And so if the person is just constantly they can have this emotional wound or this scar or whatever it is that they have to change because you need a character arc, they can have it through the whole thing, but they have to be fighting against it and overcoming it. And if
Right.
they're just constantly being pulled back to that initial thing, it does get really old very quickly.
Right, because they're not changing. And I kind of push back a little bit against the idea that your character has to totally change, but I think your character has to come to a realization that they didn't have before. And right, and like if you're just constantly fighting, and that was one of my biggest problems as I was starting to write, because I love realism. I want to write very realistic characters, and if there's a fight, it's got to be realistic and consequential and not parody. But I think what ended up happening, because I was just starting out, I was writing these characters who were weak because they were constantly fighting back but losing. Because I'm
Right.
like, I think that's what would happen. But you realize over time, like, there's a balance, because you want to make it realistic, but you've got to push your character outside of what they're comfortable with, and they can fail, but they have to learn from that failure and make a change somehow and try again, and eventually kind of find that crack in the wall somewhere. But that took me a long time to figure out.
Yeah, no, that's really critical. And it can be any kind of change too, right? Like what you're talking about, it can be a realization. So they
A
can start with.
realization, totally.
Right? So it's a misbelief, or they think something, but it's wrong. Or it can be the wants versus needs thing, where they're trying to achieve something, get that new job, because I want the money and the respect and everything, but what they really want is their father's approval, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
it can come in so many different forms. It can be a phobia that has to be overcome. It can be
yeah.
whatever it is. We want to see them achieving something. We want to see them being faced with all kinds of conflict, they're faced with something horrific and overcoming it.
Yeah, I had a character in one of my books, and by the end, like the last scene, she's not bleeding out, but she's bleeding profusely. And the bad guy got away, but she found this like weird peace in knowing she could do what she had to do. She was capable of it. And there was some kind of closure just getting to that point alone, even though she didn't slay the beast necessarily. And you have to be able to feel that yourself. It has to be a weird catharsis when you're writing it to feel like, yeah, I think this hits it. Then of course you have to get feedback. You have to agents and editors and see if you're hitting the right beats and learning from that. So whenever I finish a draft and it goes to my agent, I'm like, it's not done. It's now I'm waiting. This is the best I could do. Now I'm waiting for people smarter than me to tell me what needs to change. Because you never, for me, I never nail anything on the first attempt.
You mentioned giving 100 pages to your agent or your editor, whoever it was. Do you have like those alpha readers where you're giving unfinished work? And by finished, I don't mean it hasn't been edited, you haven't fixed it, but something you're still in the process of first drafting. Do you share that?
I used to. I was in a critique group for about 20 years. And a couple of years ago, I just kind of stopped going because I've changed enough as a writer where because I don't outline, if I give you chapter two might not exist. This character might not exist by the time I get to the end of it. So I was finding that it really wasn't helping as much as it used to. So now, and even doing the 100 pages is a new thing for me. So usually I would just go off and write a book and not tell anyone what I was working on and then just be like, here it is. And that's great. And it also causes a whole lot of problems because you realize like a lot of work needs to be done on it. So because I don't outline, it's hard for me to give my editor a really good synopsis of the next book. So I give her the high concept and now I give her the 100 pages just to make sure it feels like it meets their expectations. But I mean, it could be a shit show by the time I turn it in. So I get anxious every time. How
Yeah,
about
no, I
you?
do too, and I think all writers do. I can't share anything till it's done because I go back and I layer a lot. So I'm
Yeah,
getting through the plot. I'm trying to race to the end as fast as I can. I'm trying to get the story out of me when it's in my head and working in my subconscious. And then when I go back, I'm like, okay, you know what? I have to change this motivation. I have to plant something here. I have to change this character a little bit. So I'll go back over and over and over again. And so if I gave someone like a first draft before I did that, before I went through all the editing iterations, it would really be shallow. Like I really can't do that.
yeah, and you don't want to get feedback based on that because then you're kind of discouraged. You're like, well, maybe the overall story's terrible, rather than I just haven't layered all the subtext in yet. But yeah, because that's what I do. As I'm writing, I'm not really looking back, but I'm taking notes. I'm like, he needs to do this, or there needs to be an explanation about why he would do this. But I don't write that now. I put it in these notes, and when I go back through, I'm like, now I really start thinking about it because then you can kind of see it for its whole. But it's I always lose perspective. You read something 4 or 5 times and you're like, I don't know, maybe it's good. I
No,
know
I'm the
there's some
same way,
great
right?
parts of it.
When I give a book up to the first beta readers, like I'm always like, oh, I hope this isn't horrible. Like, tell me. And like I've even had books published. I'm like, I don't know. I mean, let's see what happens. And you get these great reviews, and you're like, oh, whew, like
Yeah,
I'm because you do see it so many times. It lives in your head. You get it out there. You do the best you can. You have a certain level of craft that you bring to it. So you're like hitting the techniques and things,
right.
but you don't know until people start reading the book. And I
Right.
think that everybody definitely suffers from this, right? If you're putting a book out going, oh, people are just going to love this, and you might love it, but you don't know until it hits the public.
Yeah, and you really need to, right. And when it gets to the time of the public reading it, then you really have to distance yourself a little bit because you really have to realize that, look, you know, if I get a lot of reviews and they average 3.5 stars, that's pretty good. Because everyone likes different stuff and some people are going to hate your book no matter what, even if all they read is your type of book, and other people are going to absolutely love it. I think the key for me going throughout my career was finding those alpha readers who you just trust. And that's really hard to do. It's really hard to find the person who is going to give you great feedback and objective feedback where you feel it. You can feel like, yes, that totally resonates with me. Um, because if you try to make changes based on everyone's ideas, it'll be a mess. It won't make any sense.
That's such a good point too, especially for like newer writers. When you put something out to a group, if you have like 12 beta readers, for example, you'll have disagreements. One person will tell you, "Oh, I love this scene, and this is your best part," and someone else will say, "That's got to be cut." So
Right.
you'll have this, right? Because it is so subjective and personal. What I found is if you have two or three people saying there was a problem with the scene, no matter what they say is the problem, something's wrong with it. If
Yeah.
they stumbled over anything, I probably need to go back and fix it. And sometimes that can just be a sentence or two that clarifies something or that changes, what it looks like. But if you and I know young writers do this all the time, they'll get feedback. Like I have a critique group with like 18 people in it,
Yeah.
and they'll try to respond to each thing and fix it. And what happens is they destroy their voice, they
Yeah.
destroy pacing, they destroy the flow of it, the beauty of the words, like, and it'll just be a disaster. And if you do that enough, and by the way, this can happen with your agent, can happen with an editor, right?
Totally.
You'll destroy it so badly that you'll
Yeah.
never be able to recover it.
You lose your voice out of it for sure. And I think what's hard to appreciate, and it'd be interesting to hear your take on this because I know you work with developing writers as well. If you're reading a book, the way that your mind processes the information is much more casual than somebody looking at one chapter that you submitted in a critique group, right? I can find 1,000 things wrong with that chapter. If I'm reading it in a book, that chapter flows fine. And you have to kind of write to that. Obviously, you want to write the best you can. Um, but then when you're a newer writer, also, you also realize like, hey, an agent might look at 20 pages. These 20 pages have to be flawless. And and then you start obsessing over every little detail because there isn't really a big picture opportunity so much. So how would you counsel a writer who's, because you have to give them space to breathe a little bit too.
Yeah, I think you have to make it as good as you can, and I've heard writers will say, "Oh, well, they'll fix that in the editing or something." It's like, no, they won't. Like, 20 pages is actually optimistic, right?
It would totally,
The
totally.
average acquiring editor reads 5 pages,
Yeah.
and a lot of times now, especially because they're getting everything digitally, like
Right.
agents won't even get through your query letter, But if they look at
Right.
it,
And it might not even be the agent looking at the query letter.
yeah, it rarely is. If it's a big agent, it's an intern, right? So if
Yeah.
somebody's looking at it with certain criteria, it's also subjective. It's really hard. I mean, the numbers are horrific. It's something like one out of every 4,000 queries is accepted by an agent in general. A lot of the big agents are getting 100 plus cold queries a day.
Yeah.
And there's I can't tell you how many authors I've talked to who had these bestsellers and who, some agents like, oh, why didn't you send that to me? Oh, I did. You turned it down, because
Yeah. Totally.
and I love talking to agents about this stuff too, because a lot of times it's the mood that they're in. They're tired, it's the end of
Right.
the day, and now they open up their inbox and they're like, son of a gun, I got 75 queries today, and they have to get through it because they get so far behind they'll never get to it. And sometimes they're just in a bad mood.
Right.
And I don't know about you, but like I've picked up a book to read because I'm like, I want to read something, and I've started it and it hasn't resonated with me and I put it down. Then like a year later, I picked up that same book and just devoured it.
Yeah. Or it could be a TV series or a movie. And it is just what mood are you in? Sometimes like this feels a little bit too heavy for the mood I'm in right now or whatever.
Or it can be like with an agent, they have, their dozen acquiring editors that they've worked with in the past and that they know and who they've spoken to recently. And in the back of their head, they know what those acquiring editors are looking for because that's a quick win, right? They're looking
Yeah.
for something, they have it, boom, I can sell that. Something else maybe so far out of the box or something different, they don't know what they can do with it. Somebody does, they don't immediately know where they can sell that. They're not sure of the market. And so
Yeah.
they'll just say no. And it doesn't have anything to do with the book often, right? I mean, I get stuff from like people in the intelligence community and military and law enforcement all the time. They're like, hey, would you look at? And I usually will say, send me the first 2 pages, and I'll look at it, and you can see like all the rookie craft mistakes right away.
Yeah.
I just had somebody send me something a couple days ago, and I started reading it, and it was spectacular. And I'm like, this is so rare, right? For like a
Yeah.
new writer. Like often you can just see, their passive voice and they're telling and they have like one paragraph that's fun, then they jump into backstory for 6 pages. And you see all these kind of rookie mistakes that happen. But I forgot where I was going with that, but it probably doesn't matter. It's just really difficult.
Yeah, I'm also fascinated going back to earlier in the conversation, and I think a lot of listeners are going to they want me to follow up on this. You made just such a throwaway comment about working 100 hours a week and writing on top of that. Because we all get the questions like, well, how do you, none of us are Stephen King. We're like, this is what we do all the time, 100% of the time. How do you fit it in? And I know the answer is because you have a passion for it, but like literally, how do you fit it in?
So, I mean, that's such a good question. And honestly, this is one of the things I talk to because I talk to new writers all the time. Everyone's who tells you, I have a book, I'm going to write, I'm whatever. I'm like, well, are you writing? No, I'll write when, So it's
Yeah.
always this future time when they're going to be at a cabin in the woods, secluded for 6 months, and that's never
Right.
going to right?
Right.
So honestly, the thing is, if you're a storyteller, and I told someone this the other day, I was at a conference and I was speaking at a conference, and a guy came in and he was telling me about a story that he wanted to write. And I remembered like 3 years ago, he'd come up to me at another panel I was on and was telling me the same thing. And I'm like, well, have you started? He's like, no, so if you're a storyteller and you're not writing, like I don't know how you feel. Like if I go a couple of days without writing, I'm not myself. Like
Yeah.
I get cranky, right? Like you have this need to tell story. And it doesn't matter who's, even if your friends and family are the only people who ever read it, you have to tell
Right.
it. So like number one, like you have to say, this is a priority in my life. And so, it doesn't mean you don't take your child to the hospital, but it just means every day or almost every day, I'm going to write. And so I'm a big believer in like, I'm an outliner, you're not, but we both come to it, I think, the same way. You're
Yeah.
going to have time set aside, whenever that is. I can tell you, like, because I mean, I literally do work over 100 hours a week. I run a literary salon. I'm the general manager of a restaurant. I do a restaurant. I do some consulting, and I'm writing. I've got all these different things
Right.
going on. So what I do is I find the time that works for me is early in the morning.
Me too.
So before my whole day starts, I'm at a
Yeah.
desk, and I know, like, if I'm first drafting, I want to shoot for. It used to be 2 to 3 thousand words a day,
Oh, that's a
but
lot.
because it's a lot, but it was fine when I didn't have all these other pressures. But now
Right.
it's at least 1,000, right? So I try
Yeah.
to do at least 1,000. And interestingly, though, I can tell you that I think it was like 3 books ago. We had some medical things going on, and we had stuff at my businesses, and it was crazy busy. And the only time I could find to write was walking back and forth to our restaurant. So I wrote an entire book, like 15 minutes at a time, dictating.
Dictating. Oh my
Yeah,
God,
dictating.
that's amazing.
And that's not ideal. I can tell you right now, like I'm a big
Yeah.
fan of dictating as a tool you use, but the 15 minutes at a time, it takes a while to get into flow,
Yeah.
and then if you can have a nice 3 or 4 hour block, that's ideal for me. Most writers get tired out because it's exhausting after about five. But in general, I probably get a good hour and a half in every day. And
Yeah.
that's enough to hit my 1,000 words.
Yeah, and I'm an hour a day. That's my, and now I'm at the place where I have, I can put that in as dedicated. I go to the same coffee shop 7 days a week, write an hour a day. That's what I do. But
That's
but
it. By the way, don't gloss over that. That is literally the key to writing, what you just said.
I
You
think it
found
is.
you're doing it, you're working every day, the words will come. If you write a page a day, you'll have a book in a year, at least a first
Right.
draft in a year.
Right. No, totally. It's all additive. And I think people are so surprised by that. And I'm like, it's not hard. The hard part of writing is learning from it to me. It's like learning how to get better and being open-minded and learning how to structure and admitting when you're not doing it well. But if you it's like anything, if you're consistent, shit will get done. I mean, but I remember when my kids were little, like they're at flag football practice and I'm sitting in the car with my laptop for those 45 minutes because that's the only time that I had. But it's funny because so I like to work with my hands. And so I built a desk recently and it took me like 2 months because I'm doing epoxy, I'm doing all, and every day I worked on it a little bit and I'm excited to work on it because I'm seeing it coming together. That's how I feel about writing. It's like it's a highlight of my day because I don't know what the hell happens next. So it's kind of an adventure for me, but it's this whole problem solving. I'm working towards an answer about this story, and it drives my interest because it's a big problem to be solved. And so I'm like, I can't wait to chip away at it every day rather than I'm going to the office and I got to deal with some horse shit that's not even interesting to me every day. It's just a matter of how it sits with you. And if it doesn't, the guy you were talking about who hadn't, he likes the idea of being a writer. And I know a lot of people like that. It's that whole future thing. And that's somehow motivating enough for them. They go to all the conferences, but they never quite write. But somehow they're happy with that, which is totally fine. I'm not trying to be judgmental, but unless you're unless you're putting in the work, and I'm not talking about like I had the muse come to me last night, so I wrote for 6 hours and I didn't write again for 3 more months. That's not sustainable.
No, 100%. And if you have to have these perfect, environmental conditions in order to write, look, there are places to write that are better. I can
Yeah.
write anywhere. Like I'll if when and I make a point of it, by the way. Like when I travel, I make a point of writing in the terminal. I write on the
Mm,
plane. even just for a few minutes, I'm checking the box. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? And
right.
it really adds up, and eventually you'll get there. And there's that Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours to achieve mastery in any discipline, and
Yeah.
it's roughly 1 million words they say for writing. I know people have written their first book and it's been a masterpiece, so it's not for everybody. But the more
Right.
you write, the better you get. And the key is, I think it's like fear of failure. I think it's once they start writing, you realize how hard it is, and that's okay. You just got to keep writing. Like, I mean, there's never a point. They call it a writing practice. When do you reach that point when you're like, okay, I got it. I am this
Right.
master writer now. I'll finish a book now, like whatever it is, book 15. And when I get to the end of it, I'll go back to the beginning of it, and I'll be like, oh my God, this is terrible. Like,
Right.
because you grow with every book. The more you
Right.
write, the better you get, as long as it's focused practice.
But I think that's what's also exciting about it too, is knowing that you're never going to be perfect, right? So if you're scaling a wall and you get to the top of it and you have a sense of accomplishment, but you're like, now what? Oh, there's another wall. Okay, cool. That wall looks a little bit harder, but maybe I'm good enough now where I can do that. That to me is what's thrilling. It's like, let me try something that I think might push myself, because that fear of failure is kind of exhilarating a little bit. There's a little bit of an adrenaline rush of like, you know, the rope might break.
So what you just said, right? Pushing something, like trying a different technique, trying something new, writing in a different tense, writing from a different POV, writing a
Yeah.
different genre. Like, I love doing that. Like, with every book, I try a different something new,
Yeah.
that I add to it. Maybe there's an epistolary element to it. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe there's, a scene is more of a character, like whatever it is. And every time you do it, it's harder because you have to learn it, but you've just added another tool to your kit. And the more you write, the better you get. Like, I mean, you can see that. I'm sure you have favorite authors, and you're reading something that was a big breakout hit. Then you go back and read, like, I'm one of those. I'll go back and I'll read the first thing they ever wrote, and it's still good, but it's nowhere near what they did like 6 books later.
Do you find like, so a good example of this is John Grisham. Like, I used to really be into his books, and then, obviously, predominantly legal thrillers. And then I remember reading A Painted House, which was just a work of literary fiction,
Mhm.
and it blew me away. Like, I was like astounded by how, like, I'm like, wow, this guy actually can write. Because
Yeah.
you think of John Grisham, you think very much plot driven, right? I'm really fascinated by the plot. And this was just like, and not much happens in this book. And you're like, I am so connected to these characters. But the downside of that, for those of us who aren't John Grisham, is that people have expectations, readers have expectations. And so all of a sudden, if you do something too different, they're like, what is he doing? This is not why I bought this book. Do you run into that at all when you're trying
Like,
different
everybody
things?
does. So
Yeah.
Bob Dugoni did that too fairly recently. He wrote a
Yeah.
book that was more literary fiction. It was fantastic, but
Yeah.
very different from his other series that he was working on. And I had that with my last agent. We had these discussions all the time about branding and about what reader expectations. And there's something to that. I just think you have to be really clear with what your cover looks like and how you market something. So when a reader picks up a book, they know what they're getting. And
Yeah.
if it's really a different type of book, whether it's theme or character or level of violence or whatever it is, you just have to let them know, because if they're expecting something different, they'll be disappointed, even if it's great. But as a writer, like, I love that you're saying this, because you want to try different things. You want to do, like, I've won literary awards for writing literary fiction. That's very different than these, like, espionage, international action adventure thrillers, or my psychological suspense, are
Right.
completely different. But when I sold those, I sold them to a specific market, so people
Right.
knew what they were getting.
But I would also guess that a fan of yours would see your voice in all of those, right? They would see you in all of those, at least, whether it's that casual turn of phrase that's very nuanced to you or whatever. Because that's kind of inescapable,
Yeah.
yeah, I think. And they'll probably be able to say, "Oh, Jeffrey's fingerprints are here from his other books. I see it, even though it's a totally different work." I would guess, because I wouldn't know how to escape that personally.
Yeah, I mean, your ethereal voice, right? It should be something, but it also changes and grows. I'll give you an example. I think it was my third manuscript I wrote, was this really cool, like, actual murder mystery. And I don't really do those. It's all more thriller, but this
Yeah.
one was really a murder mystery. And I had it, and I had a contract, and my agent at the time said, you know what, isn't going to do what you need to do. We need to rebrand. We need to do something different with this book. So I pulled it back. So it's been sitting on my desktop. I think I wrote it in 2019.
Oh,
It's just
wow.
I've been sitting on this, and it's one of my favorites. Like I've really loved this book.
Yeah.
And so I just decided a couple of weeks ago, I'm going to get this thing out there.
Yeah.
So I went back and I started editing it. Like you got to go back and read it. So I'm editing it for like the billionth time. But it's been so many years, and I went back and I'm like, my voice is similar, right? But my style has changed. It wasn't as fast paced as some of the other stuff I've written. It
Yeah.
had more description. It had a lot more atmosphere to it,
Hmm.
but it was just different. Like it felt different. But also some of my craft wasn't as good. So
Yeah.
I'm literally doing a line edit going back, and I'm just
Yeah.
fixing and pulling it up. And that was a few years ago now, but I think I re-edited it in like 2022 or something. And when I pulled it back from that publisher.
I'm the same. I mean, I never go back and look at my old stuff anyway, even the stuff that was published. But like, I can tell you, like, I mean, atmosphere is great and tone is great. I think tone is super important. But our understanding of what it takes to establish tone, I think for newer writers, it's like it takes a lot more than what the reality of it is. So so here's a page on how snowy it is outside. And if I could just write it's fucking snowing,
Yeah.
they get it. Like they've established it, and they've established your voice. And I was so guilty of that. A lot of just internal monologue where a lot of introspection. And everyone's like, we get it. And I'm like, how is this shit published? I don't you
No,
know,
yeah. Yeah, and those are the things, right? Yeah, and like flashbacks and long internal monologue and long description. And what I've learned is like you can just say it with a sentence,
yeah,
and you hit that sentence, and a lot of times through an object, or it's not, you don't have to hit it on the nose,
yeah,
you're showing something that gives the reader the feeling. And you also don't have to describe it for the reader, because as part of that is a question in the reader's mind. So when
yeah,
you say something and they look at it and they go, oh, that little moment of thinking about something or having an emotion, and you're like, well, I wonder what that's about, or I'd like you kind of know, but you don't, and you want to read more.
right.
And so when a lot of writers first start, myself included, I just over explained everything.
Everything.
Yes.
Everything. And I see that also, I am particularly attuned when people are writing first person present because that's what I do. And that's a real problem when you're over explaining there because like in your mind you wouldn't be over explaining. It's your mind is fragmented thoughts, distractions, and of course you can't write that kind of stream of consciousness. I mean you can, but it wouldn't be great. But it's somewhere in between where it's just like one word sentences, one sentence paragraphs, just staccato bursts of thoughts and reactions. And I think that melds well with kind of the attention span of readers today who are, especially thriller readers, who are like, I want to read a book in 3 days max. And I want it to absorb all the atmosphere and the tone and the fear and the paranoia and the literary brilliance, hopefully, but do it in a pithy way. And you can do that. But I think people think it has to be these long, flowery sentences. And I'm like, you're killing stuff here.
Yeah, I mean, you really are, and it just it you also, so here's a difference, right? When someone comes to writing, we've all written, right? And you write in other parts of life and whatever, but it's different than fiction in that when a reader's picking up a book, they're seeing the pictures in their head. So I wrote a book, but when I give it to someone and they read it, they're seeing a different story, right? They
Yeah.
are creating it. So the more experience you get, the more you realize that the reader can fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
So I'm not really telling you the story. I'm giving you enough so that you can create the story yourself, which is what makes that magical as opposed to watching a movie, which I also love to do. But
Yeah.
there you're doing everything for them, right? But in the
Right.
book, the reader's doing it and they will fill in the gaps. Readers are smart. That they
Right.
will they will create their own story. So I'm just giving them enough. I'm giving them enough prompts that they can make this beautiful story in their head.
Right. Totally. Well, Jeffrey, we're going to wrap up. Before we do, we're going to do a little storytelling of our own. So, I don't know if you've ever seen the podcast, but this is where we do just a quick impromptu storytelling. I've picked 3 books off my bookshelf. You're going to choose one of those books. We're going to choose a random sentence from a random page. I'm going to read that sentence, and that'll be the first sentence in a very, very, very short story. So we'll just alternate sentences back and forth, and after a couple minutes, I'll call it. These three books are very disparate. They just were sitting next to each other on my bookshelf, so I grabbed them. I've got Robert Harris's Pompeii, Cormac McCarthy's The Passenger, and Nick Arvin's Articles of War. So choose one of those.
Let's go Cormac McCarthy. What he's one of my favorite American writers, right? Just
So yeah, The Road is probably my favorite book of all time. I could not get through this. This is his final book. And I just really struggled with it.
I actually have a picture of him on the shelves behind me that one of the writers that I've interviewed here was friends with him and they had a long correspondence and he sent him this signed photo of him and the guy gave it to us so we could have it here.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's amazing. Uh, all right, give me a page between 1 and 383,
50.
and we'll see if there's words in this sentence that we understand.
So
Uh,
McCarthy can have like a story where basically nothing happens and it's just so beautiful you can't stop reading it.
right, right. I know, and like you're tempted to look words up, but you're also just like, let me just absorb because there's something about I don't know how to explain it, but I remember reading The Road and be like, some of this stuff I don't understand, but it's just the right amount of syllables, like for that sentence to like flow over me like a river. Like, it's amazing. And I'm like, is this a science? Is it just how his brain works?
He's
Um,
probably the most literary writer to write things that are essentially thrillers or horror. The Road was terrifying. He's written books about somebody stole my horse, and you're going to read 300 pages of that,
right,
and you're like, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever read.
totally. All right, well, we're going to do something that maybe doesn't sound too Cormac McCarthy. So I'm going to give you this sentence, and you do whatever you want with it. Um, the dwarf raised a hand.
All right, a chill ran up his spine. He looked around the room. Everybody was staring at him.
The man who stood on the stage paused, clearly not wanting to be interrupted. He looked down. The dwarf already felt way too used to be looking down upon, and the man said, "Do you have a question?"
He'd spent all his time trying to hide his true identity, and now he'd endangered it with this one insane, compulsive moment.
I do, the dwarf said. I do have a question. How long have you been sleeping with my wife?
A silence fell over the entire room, and the man next to the dwarf stood up and said, "And mine."
A murmur went through the crowd, a murmur that turned into talking and a few shouts. The whole time the man on the stage stood still, a thin smile creeping up over his face. He put his hands behind his back and said quite flatly, "About 7 weeks."
No one spoke. Everyone stared at him. What was happening here? The actor looked around the room and said, "You're probably all wondering why you received the invitation to come here tonight. I know all of you, and I know your wives."
I think we call it there. That's great. What I love about this is my daughter edits these podcasts. So I'm like, I can't wait till she listens to the dwarf infidelity story that we made up.
It's classic. It's classic
Yeah,
erotica.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. Man versus nature. Hey man, good catching up with you again. Am I going to see you at Thriller Fest in a few weeks?
I don't think I'm going to make it this year. I'm hoping to get to BoucherCon. Thriller Fest is one of my favorite conferences. I've been there like 8 times. I
Yeah,
really wanted to go, but I've just got a bunch of things happening this spring.
yeah.
Yeah, if I don't make it, which I don't think I will, I'll definitely get back there next year.
Okay, right on, man. Well, it was great to see your face again, and love to connect with you again soon.
Yeah, me too. Keep up the great work. I love your writing. You're doing a great job.
Oh, thanks, man. Talk to you soon. Thanks, Jeffrey.
Bye.
Bye. All right, that is my conversation with Jeffrey James Higgins. It was a good one, and a first on this show, taking a Cormac McCarthy sentence and turning it into a dwarf infidelity story. We're masterful, if nothing else. You can find out everything about Jeffrey at his website, which is jeffreyjameshiggins.com. And while you're out there, go ahead and poke around at my website, carterwilson.com. And if you're interested in any of our upcoming Unbound Writer seminars or retreats or one-on-one coaching that I do as well, you can head on over to unboundwriter.com. All right. That is it. That is it for this episode of Making It Up. Another one out just next week. In the meantime, friends, take care.